Have you ever wondered what led the wisest man in the world, King Solomon, to fall from grace despite all his wisdom? His fascinating life is much more than wealth and power. It reveals profound warnings about trust, relationships, and the consequences of being influenced by women who stray from God's character and values. This is the same Solomon who wrote precious advice about trusting or not the people around us. Yet, with 1,000 wives, he faced the impact of his own choices. What does the life of the king with 1,000 wives teach us about relationships, trust, and the traps of the heart? Curious to discover what Solomon's story can reveal? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like for more content on biblical wisdom and life lessons. Solomon's reign. Solomon's reign began in a climate of peace, but it was surrounded by family issues and political challenges. His own name, which means peace, symbolized the hope for stability and prosperity for the people of Israel. When he was appointed king, Solomon witnessed both divine and human intervention, as the prophet Nathan and his mother Bathsheba secured his position on the throne amid internal disputes. From a young age, he encountered complex influences, observing the betrayals and rebellions of his brothers, like Amnon and Absalom, which shaped his leadership vision. Before dying, his father David gave him advice that was fundamental to the beginning of his government. David told him to obey God and follow divine commandments, a promise that would bring prosperity to his kingdom. Initially, Solomon honored this advice, seeking to please the Lord and following in his father's footsteps. By asking God for wisdom in a dream, he revealed his sincere desire to be a just and wise leader. This request touched God's heart, who, in addition to wisdom, granted him wealth and honor, fulfilling the promise of making Solomon the wisest and most prosperous man of his time. As an administrator, Solomon achieved grand feats, including the construction of the famous Temple of Solomon, a desire his father David had cherished for years. The temple was a monumental work, housing the people in prayer and symbolizing the covenant between God and Israel. During the dedication, Solomon offered a powerful prayer, asking that God would always hear the supplications made in that sacred place. This dedication represented not only a milestone in Israel's history, but also the spiritual peak of his reign before the challenges that were to come. David's counsel before departing. David offered Solomon guidance that became a pillar for the beginning of his reign, to live according to God's commandments. This counsel echoed like a spiritual promise, where Solomon's success was directly tied to his obedience to God. This instruction from his father not only outlined a path for the kingdom's prosperity, but also divine protection and favor, essential in a time of political challenges and external threats. In the early years, Solomon faithfully followed David's direction, seeking to honor the Lord in his decisions. In response to this stance, God appeared in a dream and offered him whatever he wished. Instead of riches or victories, Solomon asked for wisdom to govern the people with justice, a request that showed the sincerity of his heart. The Bible records that this request greatly pleased God, who rewarded him with unparalleled wisdom, as well as wealth and honor, establishing him as the most admired and respected king of his era. 1 Kings 3:9-13. Solomon's request for wisdom marked a period of great discernment and fair decisions. Inspired by God, he developed a reputation as a wise ruler, attracting leaders and scholars from various parts of the world. This period of his reign demonstrated the impact of David's words and the importance of seeking divine guidance before any decision. Even today, Solomon's example reminds us of the wisdom found in a heart turned toward God and the humility to seek his guidance above all. Solomon's achievements. Solomon's reign is marked by grand accomplishments, especially in the fields of architecture and administration. Among his greatest achievements is the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, known as Solomon's Temple. This monumental work, which measured approximately 60 cubits in length, 20 in width, and 30 in height, symbolized Israel's devotion to God and was the focal point of the people's spiritual life. The dedication of the temple was a moment of intense reverence, where Solomon offered a powerful prayer, asking that God would always hear the prayers made there. 2 Chronicles 6:20. Beyond the temple, Solomon invested in numerous works that transformed Israel into a prosperous and respected kingdom. He built cities, strengthened trade routes, and established a navy that expanded economic relations, bringing wealth to the kingdom. The wisdom that God granted him helped him manage resources effectively, generating a prosperous economy that benefited the entire nation. Solomon stood out as an administrative strategist, which contributed to his fame, attracting kings and ambassadors from distant nations, curious about his governing skills. His wisdom was also reflected in creating international alliances, which brought peace and prosperity to the people. One of the best-known examples is the visit of the Queen of Sheba, who was impressed by witnessing his wisdom and Israel's wealth. These achievements consolidated his reputation and brought glory to the name of Israel, showing that a government led by principles of wisdom and justice can prosper. However, the future would hold trials that would test his integrity and devotion. Enjoying this analysis of Solomon's choices? Comment below with your thoughts and activate the bell to avoid missing the next chapters of this series. Solomon's decline. Solomon's decline began with decisions that contrasted with the wisdom that initially guided him. Over the years, Solomon disobeyed God's commands by entering into marriages with many foreign women, political alliances that brought not only cultural influences, but also the introduction of pagan gods into Israel. With a total of 700 wives and 300 concubines, his wives led him astray, causing Solomon to build altars for idols like Ashtoreth, Chemosh, and Molech, a practice that severely damaged his relationship with God. 1 Kings 11, 1-8. This involvement with idolatry was the first major sign of decline, as Solomon's heart began to drift away from his Creator. This distancing, reflected in the worship of other gods, caused deep displeasure in God, who had blessed him abundantly. The progression of Solomon's sin and disobedience put his kingdom at risk, drawing divine anger and causing God to raise adversaries against him. Among them were Hadad, the Edomite, and Rezon, son of Eliada, who brought great trouble to Israel, marking a period of unrest and internal conflicts. God also revealed to Solomon that after his death, the kingdom would be divided as a consequence of his idolatry and unfaithfulness. God would not take the kingdom from Solomon in his lifetime, for the love of David, but determined that his son would face the division. Thus, the reign that began with wisdom and prosperity ended in bitter consequences, where the loss of divine protection brought disunity and instability. Solomon's story warns us about the impact of disobedience and straying from God, even in the life of one of history's wisest men. Solomon's decline. Solomon's decline began with decisions that contrasted with the wisdom that initially guided him. Over the years, Solomon disobeyed God's commands by entering into marriages with many foreign women, political alliances that brought not only cultural influences, but also the introduction of pagan gods into Israel. With a total of 700 wives and 300 concubines, his wives led him astray, causing Solomon to build altars for idols like Ashtoreth, Chemosh, and Molech, a practice that severely damaged his relationship with God. 1 Kings 11, 1-8. This involvement with idolatry was the first major sign of decline, as Solomon's heart began to drift away from his Creator. This distancing, reflected in the worship of other gods, caused deep displeasure in God, who had blessed him abundantly. The progression of Solomon's sin and disobedience put his kingdom at risk, drawing divine anger and causing God to raise adversaries against him. Among them were Hadad, the Edomite, and Rezon, son of Eliada, who brought great trouble to Israel, marking a period of unrest and internal conflicts. God also revealed to Solomon that, after his death, the kingdom would be divided as a consequence of his idolatry and unfaithfulness. God would not take the kingdom from Solomon in his lifetime, for the love of David, but determined that his son would face the division. Thus, the reign that began with wisdom and prosperity ended in bitter consequences, where the loss of divine protection brought disunity and instability. Solomon's story warns us about the impact of disobedience and straying from God, even in the life of one of history's wisest men. Solomon's reflections. In his later years, Solomon looked back and reflected on the choices that had distanced him from God. In his writings, especially in the Book of Ecclesiastes, he shared his relentless quest for happiness and meaning. He explored knowledge, wealth, pleasures, and grand projects, only to conclude that all was vanity and chasing after the wind without the fear of God. Ecclesiastes 1:14. His reflections reveal the emptiness he felt by setting his heart on temporary things, abandoning the divine principles that once guided him. Solomon admitted that he had tried to find satisfaction in pleasures and material accomplishments, but he discovered that these achievements could not fulfill life's true purpose. He concluded that, without God, all wealth and wisdom lose their value. In his words, we learn the importance of seeking satisfaction in something greater and eternal, for true peace is only found in God. Throughout Ecclesiastes, Solomon expresses the frustration of a life that, without divine direction, becomes a series of insatiable desires and meaningless efforts. Ultimately, Solomon ends with precious advice. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. Ecclesiastes 12:13. His reflections leave a legacy that serves as a warning and guide for future generations, emphasizing that true happiness comes from communion with God and obedience to his precepts. Even with all his knowledge and power, Solomon recognized that, without God, everything is temporary and insignificant, a lesson that resonates with anyone seeking purpose and lasting peace. Lessons from Solomon's life. Solomon's life journey is rich with lessons about the challenges and temptations that can lead even the wisest astray. Initially, he showed humility and dedication by asking God for wisdom, a gesture that led him to prosperity. However, throughout his life, Solomon also teaches us that human wisdom, without the fear of God, becomes insufficient to protect us from temptations. His downfall warns of the danger of allowing relationships and desires to lead us away from the principles that guide a righteous life aligned with God's will. Solomon's life highlights the importance of remaining vigilant, especially when surrounded by prosperity and success. He shows that, by distancing ourselves from God and seeking satisfaction in pleasures or alliances that contradict our values, we risk losing our purpose and the peace that only communion with God offers. His experience falling into idolatry by allowing himself to be influenced by his many wives and political alliances exemplifies how decisions that ignore divine commandments can bring bitter consequences. At the end of his life, Solomon concludes that true wisdom lies in fearing God and keeping his commandments. Ecclesiastes 12:13. This is an essential lesson for anyone seeking purpose and enduring happiness. Despite his mistakes, Solomon's legacy reminds us that commitment to God must be continuous, and that regardless of achievements, true success is a life lived in obedience and reverence to the Creator. His story invites us to reflect on our own choices and priorities. Biblical examples. The Bible offers various examples that reveal how Solomon used the wisdom God gave him to lead the people. One of the most famous stories is the judgment between two women claiming to be the mother of a baby. Solomon, with divine discernment, suggested dividing the child in two, provoking a reaction that revealed the true mother. 1 Kings 3 verse 16-28. This episode illustrates how wisdom can go beyond appearances to reach the truth, teaching that genuine love often reveals itself through sacrifice. Another example of practical wisdom in Solomon's life was his ability to build peaceful alliances. Solomon formed treaties with neighboring kingdoms and married foreign princesses to solidify these agreements, ensuring decades of peace. Although these marriages would eventually lead him to idolatry, the initial pursuit of peace shows his desire for a reign of stability and prosperity. This aspect of his rule reminds us of the importance of seeking harmony, but also of the necessary vigilance to prevent personal commitments from compromising our values. Finally, the Bible presents Solomon's example in the construction of the Temple in Jerusalem. This monumental work, dedicated to the worship of God, represented the height of Israel's devotion and the fulfillment of a dream initiated by his father, David. Solomon dedicated the temple with a sincere prayer, asking that God would always hear the supplications made in that sacred place. 2 Chronicles 6:20-21. This example highlights the value of devotion and service to God, inviting us to dedicate our best efforts to Him, whether in work, relationships, or the causes we believe in. Theological interpretation. Solomon's life, from the height of his wisdom to his decline due to alliances with pagan cultures, offers a profound theological perspective on fidelity and obedience to God. Theologically, his journey illustrates how God blesses the pursuit of wisdom when it aims to serve the common good and glorify the Creator. God delights in hearts that ask for discernment to do good, and the granting of wisdom, wealth, and honor to Solomon shows how God generously responds to requests made with pure intentions. 1 Kings 3:11-13. This theological teaching still resonates, demonstrating that God values intentions and purposes that seek to exalt him. On the other hand, Solomon's spiritual decline brings an important theological reflection on human nature and the fragility of faith in the face of temptations. Solomon allowed foreign customs and gods to corrupt his faith, reminding us that faith must be continually nurtured, for even the wisest are vulnerable. In Deuteronomy 17:17, God instructs kings not to multiply wives' wealth or alliances that could lead them astray. Solomon disregarded this guidance, showing that disobedience to divine instructions leads to the loss of protection and peace. This example reinforces the theological view that fidelity to God requires constant commitment, regardless of circumstances. Finally, Solomon's life teaches that, despite our mistakes, there is always room for repentance and a search for meaning. In the books of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, we see a man who acknowledges the fragility of all his accomplishments and turns his attention back to God. Ecclesiastes 12:13 summarizes his theological conclusion. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. This ending reflects a practical theology where true fulfillment is found in communion with God and submission to his will, a lesson relevant to every faith journey. Impact on personal life. The story of Solomon has a profound impact on anyone seeking to understand the relationship between wisdom, decisions, and faith in God. Solomon's choice to ask for wisdom, rather than riches or power, inspires us to value divine wisdom above material ambitions. In a world that promotes an unending quest for success, this example teaches that true fulfillment arises when we prioritize God's guidance and values in our lives. This wisdom, which transcends human understanding, directs our decisions and provides us with discernment to live with purpose and integrity. Solomon's decline also serves as a personal warning about spiritual vigilance. He began with a strong faith but gradually allowed alliances and relationships to lead his heart astray. This aspect of his life reminds us that maintaining a steadfast faith requires continuous attention. It is easy to let subtle influences erode our values, and Solomon demonstrates that even the wisest can fall if they do not maintain a close and ongoing relationship with God. Reflecting on his choices prompts us to examine our own lives and identify areas where we might be drifting from God's will. Finally, Solomon's reflections, especially in Ecclesiastes, highlight the importance of seeking meaning beyond earthly achievements and pleasures. He concluded that all is vanity without God, reinforcing the need for an eternal purpose. This teaching resonates with those who, even amid achievements, feel the need for something greater. Solomon invites us to seek in God the meaning of life and the satisfaction that the world cannot provide, impacting how we approach our choices and our faith. Spiritual practices. Solomon's story reveals essential spiritual practices that can enrich the life of anyone seeking to draw closer to God. One of the strongest examples is his prayer during the dedication of the temple, where Solomon, with profound humility, asked God to listen to the supplications made in that place. 2 Chronicles 6:21. This prayer of dedication teaches the importance of presenting everything before God, seeking his presence and guidance before undertaking any major endeavor. The practice of sincere and committed prayer reminds us that our life, family, and work can be dedicated to God, allowing him to sanctify them. Solomon also exemplifies the value of study and the continuous pursuit of divine knowledge. His Proverbs reflect a practice of careful observation of life, coupled with the application of God's principles. By writing about topics such as wisdom, discipline, and the fear of the Lord, he reinforces the importance of meditating on Scripture and continuously learning. This practice encourages us to study the Word and apply it in daily life, allowing divine wisdom to illuminate our decisions and actions. Finally, Solomon emphasizes the practice of fearing God as the foundation of all wisdom. Proverbs 1:7. Recognizing God's sovereignty is fundamental to maintaining an attitude of reverence and humility. This fear is not terror, but respect and admiration, a practice that strengthens our relationship with God and reminds us to live according to His commandments. Solomon's spiritual practices invite us to pray, study, and revere God, establishing a relationship that guides and strengthens us in all stages of life. Challenges and common doubts. Examining Solomon's life raises frequent doubts about how someone so wise could allow himself to stray into idolatry and practices that offended God. This dilemma reflects a common challenge: maintaining firm faith amid external pressures and influences. Solomon exemplifies that even the wisest can err when they allow relationships and commitments to distance them from divine values. This leads us to question our own resilience and the importance of setting clear boundaries so that friendships, business, and relationships do not negatively affect our spiritual journey. Another recurring challenge highlighted by Solomon's story is the struggle between personal desires and obedience to God. Despite his wisdom, he sought personal satisfaction through wealth, power, and pleasures that ultimately eroded his faith. This pursuit of fulfillment outside of God raises a common question: how do we balance personal aspirations with spiritual commitment? Solomon teaches us that it is easy to lose purpose when we place our desires above God's will. This internal conflict continues to resonate today, reminding us to constantly assess whether our goals and achievements align with divine principles. Finally, another common question is about the true source of contentment and purpose. Solomon, at the end of his life, realized that all his achievements were vanity without God. Ecclesiastes 1:2. His journey prompts many to ask, what truly brings meaning to life? Solomon's search invites a deep reflection on where we place our trust and hope. In the end, he acknowledges that the essence of life is to fear God and obey His commandments, a lesson that challenges us to find in God the meaning we often seek in temporary things. Community action. Solomon's reign also provided lessons on the importance of ruling with justice and investing in the community. He used his wisdom to ensure that the people's needs were met, promoting a period of peace and prosperity in Israel. With the project of the Temple in Jerusalem, Solomon created a space for worship and communal fellowship, strengthening the people's spiritual identity. This construction was not just a physical structure, but an act that united Israel around a higher purpose, inspiring the nation to seek God in unity and reverence. Solomon also fostered Israel's economic growth by expanding trade routes and strengthening exchanges with other nations. These actions benefited the people, bringing development and job opportunities. This spirit of community investment highlights the importance of leaders who prioritize the collective well-being over personal ambitions. For Solomon, a prosperous and peaceful kingdom was the result of balancing wisdom and service, and his vision for Israel teaches about the impact that decisions focused on the common good can have on everyone's life. Furthermore, Solomon's model of leadership shows that serving the community requires sensitivity to listen to and understand the people's needs. The famous judgment between the two mothers, for example, was a public case that revealed his ability to handle community conflicts and administer justice wisely. This example reminds us that true leadership includes compassion and a genuine desire to help others, something essential in any community or group seeking to prosper in harmony. Prayer and meditation. Solomon's life illustrates the power of prayer and meditation in seeking wisdom and spiritual understanding. When God appeared to Solomon in a dream, offering him anything he desired, the young king asked for wisdom to govern the people with justice. 1 Kings 3:5-9. This attitude of humility and spiritual dependence exemplifies the importance of opening our hearts to God in prayer, seeking guidance and strength to handle life's responsibilities and challenges. Solomon teaches us that sincere prayer is the first step toward receiving divine discernment. Additionally, Solomon dedicated the temple in Jerusalem with an intense prayer, in which he asked God to hear the people's pleas and provide forgiveness and protection for the nation. 2 Chronicles 6:21. This prayer not only marked a moment of communion with God, but also demonstrated that intercessory prayer, made on behalf of others, strengthens collective faith and promotes spiritual unity. This act of dedicating a space to meditation and prayer inspired the people of Israel to regularly seek God's presence, valuing moments of introspection and connection with the sacred. Solomon also valued meditation and reflection, as seen in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. He encouraged his readers to meditate on life, human behavior, and the fear of the Lord, recognizing that true wisdom requires constant reflection. The practice of meditation helps us examine our actions and align our paths with God's will. Thus, Solomon's life invites us to seek a deeper communion with God through prayer and meditation, allowing him to guide our steps daily. Future and hope. Despite Solomon's failures and the consequences that marked the end of his reign, his story offers valuable lessons about future and hope. Toward the end of his life, Solomon reflected on his mistakes and the vanity of his choices, concluding that the true meaning of life is to fear God and obey his commandments. Ecclesiastes 12:13. This message of hope is an invitation for everyone to correct their paths and seek God at any stage of life, reinforcing that, even in the face of mistakes, there is an opportunity to restart with purpose and reverence. The division of the kingdom after his death serves as a reminder that the decisions we make affect not only our present but also the future of coming generations. Nevertheless, God's promise to David that there would always be a descendant of his on the throne points to the hope of redemption and renewal, fulfilled centuries later with the birth of Jesus Christ, the Son of David, Matthew 1:1. This continuity in Solomon's lineage reminds us that, despite human failures, God has plans for salvation and restoration, ensuring that his promises endure. Thus, Solomon's legacy, with all its highs and lows, encourages us to look to the future with hope in God. It shows us that true security and lasting peace are not found in temporary achievements, but in a continuous and faithful relationship with the Creator. Solomon's story serves as a reminder that regardless of circumstances, hope in the Lord strengthens and guides those who wish to build a future grounded in faith and obedience. Conclusion. Solomon leaves us a powerful legacy about the consequences of our choices and the impact of relationships that stray from God's principles. Despite all his wisdom, he experienced both heights and downfall, teaching that wealth and knowledge are insufficient without a solid faith and relationships that edify. His story prompts us to reflect. What choices are we making in our relationships, and how do they impact our spiritual journey? Like Solomon, who realized too late, trusting those who act with a lack of character or outside divine values can lead us down paths of pain and regret. If this message resonated with you, share your thoughts here, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and enable notifications to keep learning from these powerful stories about faith, wisdom, and choices. Ready to apply these lessons to your life? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this with someone who could benefit from these powerful reflections.